Let's begin. Yesterday was full of different emotions for everyone. And we will be talking about some of that. Close the door to the ark, please. 2 by 2 they came in until the door was shut. Okay. We will do a little reflection on yesterday after the introduction. But in this introduction, I'm going to share a video and a song. And as we've been saying to you, let's go ahead and get your undivided attention, please.
Over, shut up.
Because I will tell you yesterday, well, how much do I tell you? By your body language and the internet traffic yesterday, at the beginning of the session, the internet traffic was going like this, and it slowly went up as you disengaged. Your body posture and the internet traffic slowly went up. Until the discussion started, we went down to absolutely zero internet traffic. All that tells you is what discussion does to people's minds and engagement. So, that's the only point I'm going to make right now, other than conflict is the energy source of paradigm change. Just put those couple things together. That's in the first paper we talked about with the S-curves. Now, we have been going through the Petrine circle. Those of you that were here on Sunday morning equipping time for all of our leaders, we have been going through Petrine circle. Our leaders are Sean, can you not read that right now? Just put it down and try to listen to what I'm saying, bro. We have been going through the Petrine circle, and this is really important stuff. You got to engage, man. So, as we've been going through it, our people have been doing the author's intent, following the design, engaging their whole self in it. And Jamie's been doing that. Let me share my screen. Jamie is a...
Now, what were you saying about the internet traffic? It just went down?
When the discussion started, the internet traffic went to nothing.
But why?
Because people were engaged. In the whole world, the internet traffic went to zero.
But that means everybody got offline.
Exactly, because they were paying attention. In this room, they were paying attention. That's what that means. Believe it or not, it's... To be fair to Jeff, when you sit over there, when you sit right there, there is something about the way the audio works in this room. It really, you cannot hear over here for some reason very well. When you're right here, I was sat there on Monday night with the third generation leaders, and I had a really hard time understanding what Jay was saying when he was sitting right here.
Yeah. Unless it comes on, this thing's not working again.
No, but that thing doesn't work with, I'm talking, it only works in those microphones. This is our first time, so bear with us, please.
Yeah, we do this every week. You'd think we'd know how to...
Anyway,
I'd know.
Sometimes you can only hear like 70% of what's said from here.
Yeah, plus I got these things,
So,
they don't work.
Jamie West, married to Chad West, and 4 wonderful children, forgot about one, my bad. And she wrote this song after listening to Antone. She's been working through the Petrine circle, and then James. She wrote this song on the heels of Antone sharing. Where's Antone? There you are. Sharing on Sunday morning. And so this song really goes out to Antone and all it goes out to Antone and all of Kyiv and Ukraine and the Nigerians, the countries we can't talk about, all the other where the pain continues and we're with them. We're together. We're fully engaged with them. And so she wrote this song. I'm going to read it to you, then she's going to sing it to you. She's not going to sing it live. We're just going to play a recording. She just took her iPhone and she just played it. It's very simple. Brothers and sisters, you should not be surprised at the trials you are enduring. Hold fast to each other and hold to the truth of the word that was implanted in you, a very key phrase. It is the word of the prophets who spoke long ago of the Messiah and his perfect plan, revealed in the apostles through Jesus our Lord and lived out in his family. Hold on. Keep the faith. Don't return to the empty way of life you once knew. Hold on. Don't let go of the gospel and a way of life passed on to you. That way of life that was passed on to you. Remember it. It's the same thing Paul's doing in 1 Corinthians 11. He's reminding them of what they already know. Keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. Brothers and sisters, we are God's family, a temple that he is now building. Because we are a family, we belong to each other. So take care of the helpless among. For Jesus, the stone that the builders rejected, has become the chief cornerstone, Ephesians. And God, in his wisdom, gave all that we need to grow in his own character. Hold on. Keep the faith. Love each other deeply as Jesus loves you. Hold on. Count it joy when you suffer for loving and serving our God. Keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. Brothers and sisters, you should not be concerned when people revile, curse, and kill, for the nations will rage. The nations will rage, says the psalm. What psalm is that, Jeff? The nations will rage. Walter Kaiser talked about that. For we will join Jesus, the resurrected one, who suffered and died to bring new life. After a little while, Jesus will come and reward you for your faithful service. And so we are blessed and should count it all joy when we suffer and persevere through it. All right, she's going to bring you through all of that, and I will keep these lyrics.
She must have just written it because of the implanted in you.
Exactly.
That's the key phrase that anchors James.
Implanted in you is the whole topos
and you can see
of James. So you can pull out all these other little verses to support other things, but if you don't understand the core point of what he's going after, then you're tying yourself to a loose pearl, and you're not tying yourself to the author's intended meaning like Walter Kaiser was talking about, and which impacted our conversation yesterday afternoon. You have to tie yourself to that text. All right, so here it is. Oh, wait a minute. How am I going to play the video and show the word at the same time? Never thought of that. Let me split my screen. Amazing idea. I'm just having a conversation with myself here a little bit. Let's see.
Who did this?
Jesus, the stone that the builders rejected, has become the chief cornerstone. And God in His wisdom give us all that we need to grow into His own character. Hold on, keep the faith, love each other deeply as Jesus loves you. Hold on, count it joy when you suffer for loving and serving our God. Keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. Brothers and sisters, you should not be concerned when people revile, curse, and kill you. We will join Jesus, the resurrected one, who suffered and died to bring new life. And after a little while, Jesus will come and reward you for your faithful service. And so we are blessed and should count it all joy when we suffer and persevere through it. Hold on, keep the faith. Do not worry, for God is our judge. Hold on, trust in Him. Don't let bitterness steal away joy. Keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. For Jesus is able to keep you. He is able to keep you from stumbling. And He is always with us. He's promised to stay through the end. He'll present you before His glorious presence without fault and with great joy. To the only God, our Savior, be glory, majesty, power, and authority, now and forever. Hold on, keep the faith. His Spirit bears witness that we belong to Him. Hold on, Jesus Christ is our Lord for all both now and forever. Keep the faith, 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 keep the faith. So, keep the faith. We should sing songs, hymns, and spiritual songs to one another to encourage one another. So that's fresh. That's less than 24 hours old song created based off the months and months and months of work that we've done in the Petrine Circle and fresh off Antone sharing. All right. We now transition. Do we want to reflect some on yesterday, or shall we move on to the MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, portfolio, and the whole global system? I think I made some of the point about the internet traffic and about it.
I still don't get that point.
You don't get the point?
I mean,
People-
how are people engaged if they get offline?
Be-
You guys get it?
What it means is some people are on their computers, like Kulo is on his phone right now. And so what happens is we can...
Kulo's on the phone?
Yeah, he's texting.
Whoa.
He's got other priorities. So it's...
What did he say?
He said he's texting me.
That means in Indian context, there's something we're not doing at the beginning that all meetings that Indians do that he wants done. I'll bet you.
Yeah, and so it's just like the stuff we do with our third gen, Jeff. But I could tell you when I was bringing the teaching yesterday, I could see people's body language and your facial expressions. Your body was showing your discomfort with, oh boy, this is upsetting in many different ways. And remember, that's good. That's good. And the robust dialogue afterwards is really good. We have to be transparent with one another. We have to, this is what we're thinking. And my only point is as the discussion started, as your body language and your facial expressions were communicating, you were getting more and more uncomfortable as things went on. And then when the discussion started, in the first 5 minutes, people said, oh boy, I'm going to pay attention just a little bit because I'm going to see what's going to happen here. And so what happened is nobody was on their phone or computer or anything sucking down the wireless feed anymore. Nobody. It went down to 0. And other times we can see where it spikes. And not that we use that a lot, but we are kind of curious about it at times. When we're telling jokes, yeah, the internet just goes down to 0 immediately. People want to see how this is going to end. So the point is people were engaged in the discussion. And conflict is the energy source for paradigm change. That's a quote from the first paper about the curves. So you have to understand that conflict is not bad. Conflict is actually healthy for you because it actually shows when you're discontent with something, that's the beginning of you actually beginning to make potential changes in your life. Now, you can always be discontent and go back to the safe place of what you know, or you can be discontent and use it to move forward. So that's the point of internet traffic. Not Paul directing network traffic. This is just internet traffic, which shows a level of engagement. Okay, let's move on to the white papers. To the white paper and to the implementation of the MasterCraftsman global system. Here's what we're going to talk about. This is from an apostolic shape point of view. You remember on Wednesday I talked about apostolic view, looking at paradigms, looking at what does it take to change paradigms, looking at how it takes generations to change paradigms. Now we're talking about, yesterday we were talking about the shape, the theological encyclopedia, what a person should learn and how they should learn it in order to tie themselves tightly to the biblical text. That's what all of yesterday really was about. That's why we started with the 1970s interview with Walter Kaiser that shows the root of that this isn't something we just thought of in the last week. This is something that's been unfolding for 50 years. You said 48 years I've been trying to get a hold of you, get your time, Walt Kaiser, and you're 90 years old and it still hasn't changed. What a great introduction that was. So today we're still doing shape, but we're coming at it from the angle that Paul said to Timothy, you have to master your craft. You have to master your craft. And all of us as leaders in Christ Church that he's building now, we have to master the craft of the faith. We have to master the craft. So, Jeff has a white paper, his first white paper that he'll give an overview to. We will then discuss it some, maybe have time for a few questions. We've got a lot to talk about, and we want to be done at noon. After that discussion, we'll either take a quick break, or we might keep going. Break people. But because then we want to talk about what it looks like to implement it in a global MasterCraftsman system around the world. And then we will conclude. We'll conclude at noon. There'll be no lunch here for anybody because we need to get ready for the big banquet feast of eating and drinking and celebrating together tonight. And so we'll be done at noon, and you'll need to disperse to the uttermost parts until we get back. That was a joke of Acts 1 through 8, to the ends of the earth. Not funny. One person coughed. That was all I got. So that's what's up today. How do you want to introduce this? What do we need to introduce and talk about with this paper, Jeff, before you...
You know, I was thinking that, remember the style of this is that rather than having an introduction, we interact, or whoever is doing this, then we have the presentation, then we interact, then if we're doing it Sunday morning, then everybody takes time at their tables to interact and then give feedback to the whole group. So that's kind of the process that we're in. But I was thinking at the beginning of this, it's really been, I think it's interesting, but it's been very effective ultimately, the interchange that you and I have had with starting the white papers and starting the global dialogues. You know, because we're both going back to some of the same source. You know, the dialogues, the white papers are drawing on the paradigm papers more, which are kind of buried in a lot of people's experience. And the dialogues draw on the encyclicals more. And sometimes we cross over the same things that we're saying, but we're on a different trajectory in terms of the purpose of these. But how would you describe because I'm going to give a little bit of history, and then I'm going to start by overviewing the white papers for the next few years and dialogues and how they work, because I think it's going to be a very important foundation to our next 30-year conversation. But how would you describe our interaction? I could think of whiteboarding when I said to Michael, you know, those things, white papers are going all over like a ping pong ball, you know, and you know, you went through and lined them up in one day. It was incredible. And then I've wandered all over the place on the white papers with 2 different ways of organizing them for almost 3 years. Because they just, the pieces have to be lined up because we got real symmetry in the paradigm papers and in the encyclicals. And they're very important paths that we're both taking that bring those things forward as you're thinking of, you know, scale in them. And so I don't know if I'm clear enough in what I'm expressing here, but how would you describe that event?
Yeah.
Or that getting to this point here?
So we don't have any of this planned, you know.
And
that's
can
not
we
obvious
fix
yet.
this? I can't hear words you're saying. See, the problem, the problem is the speakers are there and they go this way, you know, and so the acoustics, you should be able to hear out there the way this is designed even without a mic, but the nature of it here.
That spot's a dead spot for whatever reason. All right. My goodness, how did we get here? Well,
and
I got to go back.
I'm particularly thinking about discussions that led up to the complementary nature of the 2 collections that we're producing.
All right. The white papers and the global dialogue.
Yeah, because it's not an easy task. We're dealing across generations. We're dealing with different purposes, and when you write, you can get into whatever you're into, you know, and to be able to build a 30-year conversation since the white papers or since the paradigm paper started to a another 30-year conversation with real continuity. I mean, I think we've arrived at it, but the process is very interesting.
So, Jeff, I would say I would go back 4 or 5 years. You made a comment to me, and you made this comment to me 15 years ago or so as well, but you renewed the urgency, passion around it. You said, when we were talking about leadership roles, you said, no matter what you do, make sure you take 1 day a week where all you do is your biblical theology work. So I would start part of what, and then, so just put that as a marker in your mind. I would say another nodal point along the way is over the last 5 years, very intensely, we've been doing this every single morning, every single Sunday morning, together with dialogue together on it, then teaching it, and then dialogue all together on it. And the week prior to it, you and I dialogue back and forth, sometimes hours and hours and hours, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours on just one particular 2 sentences in here. And you're giving me stacks and stacks of books. Jeff will say, oh, look, I got you this great book. And then he brings along 6 companion pieces, and it's this thick. And that means after all these books, I think I got clarity on this one paragraph. I'm serious. That's what it takes. So we're spending 5, 6, 10, 12, 14 hours in a week just dialoguing, trying to get clarity, and then we'll spend 4 hours every Sunday morning with all of our leaders dialoguing, teaching, dialogue again, then more dialogue, free dialogue out in the open. And so we've been wrestling for all those years. Right? So when yesterday when we hear someone says, well, if you look at the text, there's a piece of us that's, you're just reading one verse. That's a bit, so that's a piece of it, is you got to be certain, we're tying ourselves to the biblical author's intention. Individually, while we're doing it 1 day a week, you told me to do it 1 day a week, and I probably do that on the average, probably about 50% of the time I make that mark. Otherwise, so just to be 100% transparent. But we're wrestling with the text day in and day out through dialogue. It's not just Jeff Reed making books because he likes to. We're dialoguing about it because we want to get what Walter Kaiser was talking about, the last paragraph. So then I would say, Jeff, then I would fast forward to you and me where we're saying to each other, well, this is a new season for us. God, this is clear. Spirit has us in a new season. What's your role? What's your sweet spot? And then you turn around and said the same thing to me. What's your sweet spot? And it took a couple years to kind of figure it out. We whiteboarded it out. We were talking, we were arguing, we were fighting. I said this to him. I said, don't be a jerk and don't get in my way. And he said, quit being a jerk and quit being an idiot. I don't know what he said, but and so but all that was trying to figure out, well, where does God have us? We had one conversation. Is this making sense? You have to stay in the conversation. And it's one conversation. We had one particular time. You remember it? You know what I'm going to say now without me saying anything else?
No, I'm curious, though.
Oh, that's too bad. I thought I would say 3 words and you'd be able to connect with me. But sometimes we do that now. We were in a room and we had been dialoguing for months and months and months, probably almost a year, and we just came to just almost a transcendent moment where we said, you know what, if time and money and nothing else mattered, what would you do? What would you do? And we both kind of are like, ooh, that sounds fresh. I think I could really envision that. And we took the whiteboard and we just drew up just a small little square up in the top right corner. Instead of time, money, nothing else mattered. Wipe everything away as best you can. Everything away. What would you do? And we just started writing a few things. And that's kind of been the, I feel like I got your brush in my pocket here. It's catching on my...
You might want to borrow it with the back of your hair. Oh, that's good. It's been driving me nuts from this angle.
Back to the transcendent moment. And so I think it's a constant hermeneutic with each other about what the scriptures are saying constantly, every day. And then it's a constant hermeneutic on what does this mean for us? What does this mean? And so you're tying is it Ted Ward that said this? Tie one hand to scripture all the time, tie one hand to the theology and culture. Theology of what's going on in your life. And so I think we spent 3 weeks together in this December. 3 weeks. 5 weeks. Holy cow.
All of December
Even
and the first
worse.
week of January.
Even worse.
Don't mess up my illustration.
It was terribly wonderful. And I think that's that's when we really start hammering out the white papers, the global dialogues, because what we're doing all the time is when we're traveling around the world, 50-some countries using the curriculum, less that are implementing the way of Christ and his apostles, but that's all has its stages. So everyone's at stages. That's good. We're all on a path. Our role is kind of collect. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. And we kind of coalesce that all over here. And our role is to kind of keep a view on what's happening, keep a view on what's moving. And then our role is to equip and write tools so we can move up that curves together to give you another piece. And so I think that's where we are. That's my long-winded answer.
I think
meant to be shorter, but
I think also the thing that's happened across this 4 years is that Tom McCauley with McClellan Foundation challenged me in the past, back in 2004, the first time I went in with him to India and China, that if you with your whole system, and we're the only ones with a type 1 to 5 system, that goes all the way from non-literate to top level training, doctoral level training. He said the way the gospel is expanding in the global south, which is somewhere between 800 million and a billion that have expanded in about 50 years outside of the Western system. He said, but if you can actually get this paradigm embedded into India and China, then you'll shape the whole global south. We didn't have the capacity to do anything in China really in 2004. That started in 2014 now. But I think in the midst of all the transition of you taking a positional role, and us developing it into a complementary apostolic role, we've seen exponential growth beyond what we thought. Mm-hmm. Because in this same period of time, all of a sudden we're at the center of all of these, literally, just like India, at the center of all of these house church movements in that big country. So from my perspective, there was a lot of weight on the fact that you and I are lined up. You've used the term on the same page, but we're lined up because you're going to write a bunch of stuff that has everything to do with moving to scale in the right way. And besides finding the Pauls, I'm going to be writing stuff that not only finishes off some things, but that moves that moves forward, which is what these white papers are about. Some very important next 30-year steps, and so getting that lined up in light of the fact that there's just more weight with the foundations not supporting us anymore, and the exponential growth in China, and it kind of, to me, it just, which is why I'm starting where I'm starting in this paper, showing the next few years, how we're shaping the conversation. And and both of us looked at each other on the other side of this 5-week window. Actually, Michael canceled all of his travels that he had set up, and we did literally spend 5 weeks, from the very beginning of December to the first week of January, including then interaction with particularly individuals on the apostolic team, or constantly with the senior elders or the city elders in the context of it, to make sure that we had the next phase foundation laid, in a right way. So that's kind of what's behind some of the introduction to this.
All right, why don't you present it, and that'll get us deeper into.
How I haven't been paying attention to how we're structured. It probably would take me a little bit longer, 40 minutes or something.
That's fine. That'll be perfect.
What's that?
Well, it won't be perfect, but it'll work. Yep. Yep, fine.
All right. The title is actually Michael's. We're wrestling with what, the foundation that's laid in our degrees is pretty amazing for the 2 people in the whole world that could ever get through one of them. All right. Our D-min was 2 D-mins. And by the way, we've got that in the shape now that I think is just going to be phenomenal. But we kind of got to the point that, in a way, the tail was wagging the dog in terms of how hard the degrees were. Degrees in any situation, the standards are there, people do what they can, and then they're usually recognized, so at one level, there's such a responsibility for a desire to do things really right that, I'm not going to go there, but we're thinking about the degrees and how to make those adjustments. We've wrestled with it for a long time, we've just had some phenomenal experiences with some of our pathways that I'm going to be talking about. Like, we looked at the shepherding counseling pathway yesterday. We have 4 or 5 of them that are really critical. The Apprenticeship Academy and raising the next generation of youth. Very, very important piece that I'll just briefly touch on in this. And so kind of how do you structure stuff? And Michael reached back into the Center for CBT, which I did in '95, which was way ahead of its time, all the way back to our ministry apprenticeship program in 1972. And he shows up at the beginning of one of our mornings with this idea of, let's call the whole thing MasterCraftsman Apprenticeships and Portfolios, and then call it MAP, back to the original MAP. So it's MasterCraftsman Apprenticeships, Portfolios. And it becomes a schema, a framework for everything that we do that has some formality to it, such as certificates or certifications or degrees. And then we also wrestled very strongly with the idea that that we are not, our pathways are not programs. And so it's very important to get this idea. Pathways are not programs, but they do have structure. Because programs are policies and rules, and you lose your ball in the woods very quickly with programs, and they institutionalize. So some very important things are built into this. MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, Portfolios. When he put on that on the board, I instantly fell in love with it and thought, man, that's our framework. That's our next generation framework related to the paradigm curve of theological education, of renewing the whole thing. Because the very beginning, in 1992 with the paradigm paper, if you look at the bullets at the end, what I'm really saying is the whole system has to change, top to bottom, including our publishing, all of that industry, the context of training our leaders, including assessment, recognition, and accreditation. It's all got to change. And so this visualizes it, I think, as we go through this. Now, okay, all of the paradigm papers are situational if you think about them, but particularly the encyclicals and even Michael's yesterday. But kind of our journey here in a very nutshell is on this last trip, as soon as I came out of China, I had it planned where I had a 3-day window. Both of us try, because it's intense when you're traveling internationally. You're going into maybe three different countries, but ideas are flowing, and then if you get back into the flow here before you got stuff down, they vaporize. So we try to create a writing window, which is, one time I think of, I was in Bangalore. I don't know which encyclical it was, but I had a 3-day window in Bangalore by intention. Kovalam was another one. Now that's the place you want to be, on that beach, with fresh seafood. But at any rate, so I had a 3-day window, and finally the framework of the paradigm papers really came, or man, this is going to be bad. The white papers came together. Well, we had that 5-week intense time right before we left for 2.5 weeks in the latter half of January, and Michael got his global dialogues lined up, and we had a conversation because I didn't think there was enough symmetry to it. They seemed a bit disparate, and I explained to him how I do it so that you can see the whole collection ahead, or there's some marker on it, and that's where he rearranged everything, came up in one day with patterned after acts in a way that really tells you exactly, where he's going. It gives unity to the collection. And but keep in mind the backdrop of these 5 weeks is that we were 4 years in the process really rethinking everything. And in the midst of that, McClellan Foundation, really with Michael going into positional leadership, really wanted everything out of here and into a corporate board with big money attached to it if we would do that. And so the stress of all of that put Michael flat on the couch a couple times, but due to good counseling, he was resurrected. But seriously, he began to process that. He and I processed it, and what we came up with, we went to the senior elders, particularly the city elders, and got 100% unanimous response that we couldn't blink. No matter what the consequences were, we couldn't blink. The consequences were significant salary cuts on all of us. That are there to this day. But forced us to, in the context of that, because see, if you're sitting on scale, 75% of the large scale church planting movements in India, complementary in another significant place, all of a sudden you realize that, man, you need some resources, to do this the right way. So at any rate, the fog began clearing as we talked through all the pieces, really became clearing in 2023. And then we focused on this 5-week process that brought about a tremendous amount of convergence. Michael lined up the dialogues. On the trip, I lined up the white papers. And we found ourselves at the place of Global Center for MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, and Portfolios. And part of this is, Michael's going to share following this quite a bit of stuff, but primarily one chart that you can see the 6 component parts of the Global Center for MasterCraftsman, which shapes the future for us in a way that it's rooted more carefully in the biblical terminology as well. Now, the white papers, I'm doing 6 papers, MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, Portfolios, Shaping Comprehensive Leadership Development. But I'm drawing on the conclusion in each of these of the paradigm papers. You know how when you get to the end, the church-based theological education is not a very big paper. A lot of the other papers are pretty big. That's about 12-page paper. But at the end of it, you got these bullets like, here's the future. About 10 of them. Got our model first, and here's the future. And we followed that for 30 years. So we want to be able to tie that together and show what we haven't done yet, because we can see that on the next 30 years. And so each one of these is rooted. So the first one, MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, Portfolios, Shaping Comprehensive Leadership Development. I start with the end of the paradigm paper that says, look now at the future, look at the next 30 years. And then with Civilizations, Global Cities, Diasporas, Shaping Global Mission Strategies, Church-Based Missions, Creating a New Paradigm. Same strategy, here's the bullets. New Perspective on Paul, the First Principles, Mastering the Scriptures, Shaping the Entire Next Theological Encyclopedia. Where did that start? Kaiser. And that where he turned my mind upside down in the 1976 conversation. And so we draw on the framework for how to move ahead on creating a new theological encyclopedia. Traditioning of Paul, hermeneutical communities, ministry schemas, shaping theology in culture based on church-based hermeneutics, creating a new paradigm. Remember, the engine to that is creating a hermeneutical community. Not a professional exegete who can serve as a pastor for the whole church that can't think, but actually a hermeneutical community that can think together. And then apprenticeship, secondary education, next gens, shaping the next generation of emerging adults. That's where we went with Christian Education Part 1. And the whole development of resources of how you move from 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18 with your kids, and launch them on out. As well-established young men and women with a clear competency to be effective in the churches and out in the world. And then the last paper, Good Occupations, Unique Life Work, and Intergenerational Legacy. Here we're shaping future generations, and a big focus when you examine those 2 papers on the whole idea of a completely different educational process of moving from secondary education to the workplace. And we have a failed college system, a university system internationally that's under radical change, and we need to be on the front end of that. Now, the paradigm papers address paradigm type changes that occur every 400 years, actually, if you look at Hans Kuhn. The encyclicals are papers to be circulated amongst emerging movements of churches, particularly with the Global South in mind. The white papers are pathway conclusions of the original 6, but focused on how to stay in the network mode, how to stay in the mode of the first 300 years of the early church with schemas, principles, processes, and practices in traditioning Paul, rather than the institutionalization that will come with big money and in a Western situation. And then dialogue papers are designed to complement the white papers for the purpose of taking their next Christendom shaping nature over the next 30 or 40 years. So they're going to come out of the they are coming out. The 6 that he's designed so far are coming out of the encyclicals. In terms of those general pathways of implementation out of Acts, that's why it's patterning after Acts. In other words, how are we going to go to those steps and pattern it carefully out of that? And so here's our gatherings that our church, which we looked at yesterday, shepherding care of counseling, patterned after Acts. The first one is how our churches can and should function like the New Testament, how elders of churches should oversee the primary maturing, and there the idea is in the framework of shepherding counseling, let's look at some specifics of how to go about doing that are general enough and principled enough that it can be a global dialogue, and they can wind up, and those that are in the dialogue, working creatively in their own situation. Apostolic teams as gospel progression to the ends of the earth, patterned after Acts. How apostolic leaders and their teams are essential to a fulfillment of the Great Commission. Again, it's just really, really clear that apostolic teams is a foreign concept. In modern day missions today, in most of our churches, and it's very hard to get hands around that because you've got the reality of institutional Christianity all over the place that snuffs out the entrepreneurial nature of apostolic teams. Benefactoring, patterned after Acts, how everyone should be involved in the gospel expansion to the ends of the earth, but specifically how you develop benefactoring hub churches and benefactors themselves. Intergenerational leadership, how Paul and his team compare to Western board structures. That's where everything exploded. Are we going to have a church-based foundation, or are we going to do a corporate board with people with real money? We don't have real money around here. And then paradigm curves for gospel progress patterned after Acts, how to interpret the past in light of the future. That's what we looked at yesterday, which really reaches back into the whole framework and imaging that started about 1990 in understanding and the creating a new paradigm within the paradigm papers. And then solid gospel foundations, how to fully establish churches in the gospel so that they really multiply. Okay, I'm calling my series the white papers because typically the purpose of a white paper is to advocate that a certain position is the best way to go or that a certain solution is best for a particular problem. When used in commercial purposes, it could influence the decision-making processes and current prospective customers. That's Purdue, who's one of the most creative of the global universities, by the way, today. And so part of the purpose here is to show you the roots, go all the way back to the paradigm papers, and move forward and show you the last 30 years and how we went after those bullets on this one and on missions. Part of it is to sell you on our current system because it's unique, it's rooted in a different encyclopedia. And all over the world, what happens is people get started in it, they like the first principles, but then you got to do some work. So let's find something simple. Let's find something that has terminology that everybody understands. Let's find, and so then what happens is, before people understand what they're doing, they replace it with old paradigm stuff and mix it through. And so if you go after that, people will say, oh, you just want to sell your stuff. Well, first of all, we don't sell it. We don't make money internationally, believe me. But the whole concept of the competition for American stuff with money into India and China is unbelievable. And so not only can you wind up with a bunch of money, but you can wind up with something easy to do. And that just begins ripping apart the strategy. So the white papers are partially this. So let's go back at the end of every encyclical. So what was I up to in 1992 with church-based theological education? What did I hope comes out of it? Well, look at this bullet. the set before it is in your notes too. Well, there's two summaries, the model and then this, but specifically what we're going to do. At Build International, we're working to create such a model. The core ingredients of our model is following. Now see if you can see our trajectory. A 10-year church-based strategy guide for churches. A 30-course core curriculum and lifelong learning update system. A comprehensive seminar training network. A comprehensive church-based assessment strategy built around life development portfolio with a minimum of 7 years of ministry experience built into the assessment. An online computerized resource center. A publishing and translation network. An international network of resource scholars. An international network of individual churches and associations of churches. This is really interesting because I really wouldn't use denominations. I called them associations, but I didn't understand complex networking, at that point. So that's as far as I could get, associations of churches, which means you got clusters of churches associating with one another, which is different than a denomination. It's pretty funny when you look at some of these. I think, man, did I dodge a bullet there? I didn't know what I was talking about, but we stumbled into the right thing. An interface strategy of theological seminaries, graduate schools, and Bible colleges and other training organizations. That's that idea of we build partnerships with schools. We've got several of them in India, and we'll leave your formal track alone at this stage. Hopefully you'll use, I'm thinking a new theological college. I see you, nodding. That's the only place in India, by the way, that Walt Kaiser ever was a new theological college for a week. Matthew Varghese is one of the founders of New Theological College up in Dehradun, is it? In North India. But beside that, we'll help you develop the future of your seminary and become a resource center. That's what that point is. And then the cultivation of church-based regional resource centers, a new generation of seminaries. I hung on to a new generation of seminaries because seminary originally in its root means a seminal context, but that gradually went by the wayside also because you got to have a new lexicon. And so you just can't use the word in a new way and have people understand. But these are the bullets of what we laid out in 1992. So there's 8 reasons why I'm doing this paper, all of these papers, I mean, so you can thoroughly understand our system. You can deepen your understanding of the building blocks of how to build the system. And that's the way to think about the chart that Michael's going to be sharing on the Global Center for MasterCraftsman map. MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, Portfolios. And so they're building blocks. And these are not implementation pieces. They're to show you the building blocks and how to and what they are so that you use them right. The dialogue papers, or the global dialogues, and we're not calling them papers, but they are, but global dialogues, the system that many of you are involved in where the GRTs, the global resource teams that are our partners, help the partner resource teams, all of our build coaching, all of our supplementary stuff that's online. There's all kinds of systems that are being built right now to give you the support in building your stuff, your whole plan. But these are just the building blocks, so you've got clarity on what they are and why those big pieces have to be clear in your head to implement with all the other assistance we're giving to help you build your own situations. To understand the enterprises, systems, and resources by their common groupings, so you can learn how to use them according to the intended design, avoiding using them in the old Western institutionalized way. We fell into that trap ourselves in terms of our competency-based thing and making a strong competency in every one of the 5 units. I remember the French, where are you at, Felipe? Okay, these guys, the French kind of like do everything thoroughly. And so they were complaining about 10 years into this with the leadership series that this is just exhausting. And so what they did was they determined that they needed to do every unit thoroughly of a leadership course, every project within it, and missed the point of here's at least the asterisk project, and wound up so thorough in the process that they wound up like we did in our competency base, using the courses differently than how they were written. You're supposed to make sure you're doing some work in each unit, but when you get to the end, you put together your plan, or you put together your final piece. And so learning to use the stuff according to the intended design, not measuring it by detailed policies, and we'll look at that too. To keep you from easily replacing parts of them with simpler tools that are carriers of the old theological education paradigm, or leaving holes in your system by not using them or understanding the value of them. There's nothing that we're giving you that is not integrated. To address the constant need to explain network by network why the build system and its resource tools, this is a worthless one, are designed the way they are. I'm thinking, maybe if some read this, I won't have to have this conversation over and over and over again. That one needs to go, doesn't it? So you understand the major paradigm developments of the next 30 years, which I'm calling next 30, because it's clearly that's the trajectory that we're on. Okay, what is this thing? What are the building blocks? MAP, MasterCraftsman, Apprenticeships, Portfolios. There's 6 component parts. The MasterCraftsman taxonomy, and these I'm going to hit really, really quick. It's more thorough in your paper. Apprenticeships, Portfolios, Pathways, very important concept embedded in Pathways that we've moved forward that I think is going to really keep us from the trap of institutionalization. Resources, and then global assessment and recognition. And we've been arguing for quite a while that the entire assessment recognition system, accrediting associations, theological degrees. In fact, the argument has been you need theological degrees for cultural currency. The reality is theological degrees work against your cultural currency almost every place in the world. Other degrees that show your competency, secular degrees, if you would, of your profession and competencies are very important cultural currency. But theological degrees, you almost want to take the theological part off the degree in most countries in the world. And some countries say, no, we got to have them because we got to have certification or we can't be pastors or they're going to throw us out. But the reality is they want certification. Every one I've looked at, very rarely do they say they want degrees. They say they don't want ministers that are uncertified and untrained. So, MAP, Global Center for MasterCraftsman. I don't know what your acronym is, Michael, on this. GC, that's not what I said. It's GCM-MAP. But I'm not going to say you do. He turns everything into an acronym. And some of them I'm getting used to, and they're really cool. But I think TWCA just doesn't do it. The way of Christ and the apostles. And we're going to do TWCA. Okay, that's all I'll do on that. MasterCraftsman taxonomy. This taxonomy, you know, I couldn't figure out. Is Don Johnson in here? Don? Yeah, Don. Don's our memory bank for those of us that have been here 45 years. Do you know the first time we started using type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 liters? I can't figure it out. But what I do know is that orange sheet. You guys remember the orange sheet, type 1, Leadership Mastery 1, Leadership Mastery 2, Leadership Mastery 3. That's a taxonomy. We're doing the same taxonomy, but what, you remember, Don? What's that?
After Barrett.
After what?
Barrett is working on it.
Yeah, I think that's all I could come to is that Elliston actually was the one behind it, but then that pastor, David Bennett, yeah. So he took Elliston's taxonomy. Elliston was a missions professor at Fuller of type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 leaders. Type 1 being grassroots, type 2 being elders, deacons, whatever, type 3 being pastors, which we had to split in half, the difference between village pastors and city pastors. Type 4 being regional leaders and type 5 being national leaders. In other words, every movement, regardless of its formal structure, has leaders at all those levels. And the reason why I'd been in India since 1983, but in 2004, when I went in with Tom and McClellan found us in 1999, because we were the only ones that had any kind of a semblance of a system that went all the way up the ladder. Well, and then there was the India leadership study by Bennett, and again, there was huge clashes there because basically they were taking type 1 through 5 and finding all kinds of curriculum suppliers that some would do type 1, some would do stuff in type 2, and it became a hodgepodge. You had more philosophies than you did actually small components of a system that you could put into type 1 through 5. So he wanted me out of India, and I wanted him out of India. And that became apparent. We now have the framework fully developed by staying with that for a 20-year period. MasterCraftsman 1. And MasterCraftsman is important because all believers need to become fully established, as Paul said. But Paul referred to Timothy as essentially a master craftsman. And so the idea of master craftsman and being able to assess what are the component parts in each one of those levels that really measure up against the biblical criteria that say, at this level, you're a master craftsman and you're on your way to, the top level. So it's a higher concept than the taxonomy, than the degree or certificates or certifications of some type. And that's all the way back to the orange thing, where you had degrees and certificates and the certification and all that, within it. So that's the history behind this. So now, master craftsmen, all believers. 2 is all types of leaders. 3 is all types of elders, deacons, and leading women. 4 is all types of senior elders, apostolic leaders, or ministry leaders. And 5 is national or global leaders, apostolic leaders of networks. And so we basically are taking a very serious look at this, looking at the criteria that's there biblically for people, because you can identify the functions. And what Paul identified particularly as the qualifications for the functions that are matched up with these different levels. So the point is here, don't forget that it's boldened, is the whole paper is MasterCraftsman taxonomy, apprenticeships, portfolios, pathways, resources, global assessment. So if you flip through it, you won't see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you'll see the bold in it. So we're going through the component parts. So that's the taxonomy. A second point is portfolios. Oh yeah, there were. Okay, so that's the taxonomy. Change the slide. Oh. Hire somebody to do this. Apprenticeships. That's the second one. So keep in mind, we're going from craftsman taxonomy to apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are at the heart of our entire theological education paradigm. We began with MAP, Ministry Apprenticeship Program, in 1972. We've now matured the theological education paradigm MAP, Master Craftsman, Apprenticeships, and Portfolio. And that was the first thing Michael said when he was putting this on the board. He was kind of saying, I got it. All right. But then he went back to MAP, into that original brochure, and we're not calling it a ministry apprenticeship program, but the core ingredients there were really solid. Curriculum was horrible, but Master Craftsman 1 through 5 is an apprenticeship theological education system, national and global apostolic leader apprenticeships. In fact, type 5, we're not going to have any materials or direct pathways, but it's going to be by invite from other type 5s to spend anywhere from 3 to 7 years with them, like a residency of doctors, really intensifying the learning and development process in whatever their laboratory is of their network. but also the Apprenticeship Academy. And the Apprenticeship Academy we're going to look at in detail when we get to White Paper 5, Church-Based Christian Education, Childhood and Adolescence, and how you lay the foundation to transfer them into from education to employment in a way that's really built around their life work. And their life is on, every believer is on the path for becoming a master craftsman. Remember Farley's key statement: today, theology and unity and theologia, the unity and fragmentation of theological education. He said, today, theology is a matter of academic discipline, of training in academic disciplines for professional ministerial preparation. In the past, theology was an orientation of the soul for the purpose of acquiring wisdom that all men and women need regardless of their station in life. Doctors should be master craftsmen. Janitors should be master craftsmen. The whole range of what would be considered as more successful or less successful employment. So that's all going to be built there. But the Apprenticeship Academy, we've worked at very hard in the last 3 years. Jay, who's one of our senior elders, was up here with us yesterday, and I have worked extensively on that because half of Jay's career was high school, and half of Jay's career was university professor in an extension department, leading it at the university. And so he's attached, and we're one of the leading states in apprenticeships. We got 400 high schools in Iowa, and government money behind it for setting up apprenticeships in the high schools. And you'll see a book I've been pushing called Apprenticeship Nation that shows how we're on pathway within the next decade of 50% going through apprenticeship as opposed to going through our universities. Our government, apprenticeship.gov, you can get on there, has 24,000 registered apprenticeships. You can get into any profession, including engineering. And the apprenticeships, on the average, you apply to them like a job. On the average, they graduate with 94% retention, $70,000 a year jobs, and they made $60,000 getting an engineering degree rather than paying $60,000. It's the future. And so we're on the cutting edge on this. The Apprenticeship Academy is an umbrella for the bachelor's degree, or a kind of certification that includes apprenticeship. And we built this so strong now that on 120 hours that would be in a normal bachelor's, 40 of the 120, 1/3 can be an apprenticeship. 1/3 is life development ministry stuff, and 1/3 academic. So it becomes a very doable thing. So at any rate, youth apprenticeships from education to employment. Rebuild the program we've been probably 6 years into. Those who have to rebuild their lives need an apprenticeship. You remember in job shift apprenticeships and Life to the End, there's a whole section in there. If you're in the wrong job fit, how are you going to change the whole thing? If your mama wanted you to be this, and you realize that that you ain't that, then you got to make a shift. And job advancement apprenticeships. We have one young guy that in our first round of apprenticeships, we had about 14 in that group that started in September. He designed an apprenticeship with the training inside the company, and in 18 months positioned himself using the principles to double his salary by looking carefully. But it's integrated with all your life development. So as you hear Michael say all the time, it's life work. It's your life calling. But paid work is a pretty important part, for most people. And so we got to be in the right job fits, SEMA, etc. So the whole Master Craftsman apprenticeship, and another one, by the way, that's really developing is in shepherding counseling, helping people begin to develop. Now, wait a minute, I'm getting mixed up. Leave that alone. Okay. Portfolios. Did I move too fast? No. Portfolios, that's the second. The basic idea is simple. There are two component parts, folios and portfolios. Folios are a loose collection of your current life work artifacts and attestations of others assessing your work. Portfolios are a fixed collection of your current life work, artifacts, and attestations from others assessing your work. Actually, I brought my portfolio, which is a folio, and we can get it at the break, but I was going to put your portfolio, which is sitting on his table and is leather bound with a cover, that give illustrations of how we both go at this in a very serious fashion. So we're practicing it as a life pattern. At any rate, the list below is just an example reflecting the build map pathways, not pathways designed by partners, though some of the examples will be the same for partner programs to the degree that they are using build resources. Now, the whole concept of the portfolio developed over time. The first paper that I did with Ted Ward was 1988, called NACAMP, North American Council for the Assessment of Ministerial Preparation. In other words, how do you change the whole system by saying that there needs to be, on the degree, there needs to be an assessment. And really, this was built off of what happened in the medical field. The Flexner report in 1910 that was produced said too many doctors are cutting off the wrong leg, so they got to have apprenticeships. All right, so the whole internship thing started, as a result. And now it's very well developed that after 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, you do 3 to 7 years of residencies. That all came out of that. So we said, let's create something that regardless of whether you got a degree or not, there's some kind of a council that says, this person has apprenticeship or residency type experience, and so they're qualified. And, what did I know then? 1988, 62, 72, 82. Yeah, I knew something because by then I was 34. But at any rate, Ted and I built that, but, in it was embedded, the answer is the portfolio system. And even artifacts and attestations, because good graduate programs were built, by the two of those at that time. So the foundation goes back there. Then I built the life development portfolio, which I have up here, and that's the nice embossed red burgundy paper one, for those of you that were around that long. Then in 1997, I built the 7th priority life development portfolio, which in 2003 was published into Life to the End, a life development portfolio tool. And now we have Apprenticeship Academy Life Development Portfolio that we developed in 2020, and now a shepherding counseling one. So that when somebody comes in for counseling, you remember the whole pastoral care taxonomy, you start down here with the gospel and you move up to getting established in the faith of first principles, then in your life work where you're effective and engaging in good occupations. But some people need extra help, so they're not on the trajectory. So your counseling is establishing them, so make the case where you start their portfolio. So every time somebody goes into counseling, those formal counseling, our leaders will give them a portfolio where they start their work, because we're going to edge them over as they solve the problem to the life development path, because counseling is shepherding. Okay, here's an example of a folio. This is a nice leather portfolio with a little metal clip on it. You open it up, you got a clip on this side, some papers on the other. And you saw our next gen high school guys up here, yesterday, or I guess they were all around this table. They're all sitting with one of these, and they're taking it seriously, because after our 3rd gen thing that Michael does, they come over to the lounge and Michael and I work them over. And they got to be working on their portfolio. So they got a nice leather one. I bought it for them. But if they screw up, they don't bring it, they can't get in. They got to go back and get it. But if they get in, and Michael's interviewing them, and they haven't done any work, then I've got pink portfolios, pink ones like this. So then we take their portfolio back, they put their papers in the pink one, and they got to carry the pink one around for a month until they can earn their way back. And man, they've come alive on this, because the portfolio, yes, it's your organized stuff for first principles or whatever you're doing, your life goals, your SEMA, but it's also your key stuff you're doing right now in school, if that be the case, or a trajectory you're on to improve your skills in the job that you're in, because you're integrating things with life as a whole. So the MasterCraftsman folio, which is working, artifacts by the way, are the things that you're producing. Attestations are the things that someone else is saying about you. A letter of recommendation, a certificate, etc. So the kinds of things that go in this are your development plan checklist, whether you're in a certificate, degree, a personal ministry portfolio, SEMA, your Taylor-Johnson, life development timeline and story, your long-range immediate goals, those all come out of life to the end, your current body of work that you're listing the progress on, and then your life work master plan, your ministry master plan, and your habits is the last thing in life to the end, where you got a set of life habits, your reading habits and that sort of thing. Attestations are your, attestations should not have a bullet. Current attestations, that's the heading. Certificates, degrees, certifications, licenses, professions, apprenticeships, letter of recommendation, commendation or letters of recommendation from apostolic leaders, elders, specialized ministry, etc. Now, pathways is the third of the six. And this one, we were kind of calling it pathway programs, but it's very important to understand the difference between, and I do this in, I guess it's not here. Okay, pathways are I got the same. Boy. Okay, our pathways are not programs in the traditional sense. You could take several pathways to a degree from the Antioch School or certificates from the Global Center of MasterCraftsman. So in other words, you could not enroll. So you got your life plan, and you don't even have a pathway. You're just going through the resources and following some of the things from life to the end and your portfolio, and you're not in a pathway like shepherding counseling, or you're not in the degree pathway, but you're just doing things, you're collecting them. Or let's say you're in a non-degree pathway like that shepherding counseling. But along the way, you're pulling your pieces together and you say, well, and you're just doing them loose, and you say, I really want to be in a certification pathway for elders and deacons. Well, then you can take your work that you've done and have it assessed and either finish in that pathway or get recognition for it. Or you're going along in a pathway and you say, well, wait a minute, shepherding counseling, but I got so many things done here, I could turn this into a master's really easy. You don't have to take the courses over again. You don't actually have to enroll in the degree program. You pull your stuff together, you meet the competencies, and you say, give me a degree, if it's properly assessed. But at the same time, for some, it's going to be helpful to go through the 2 years, 1 year for master's certificate, 1 year for master's degree. So there's complete flexibility. It's where all of education is going in the global universities. This is not that innovative, but it happens to be that we have it and can do it. Remember two things. You do not need to apply for a program, just create a pathway to follow at your own pace for months to years. Build has pathways that you can just follow, and your network partner is a partner that has pathways recognized by GMC map. It's not real good, but it's better than nothing, which we have right now. Even a degree in our system is not a program in a Western sense, but a pathway for you to follow that ends or could end in a degree. The second thing to remember is even with these flexible certificate and degree pathways, completing them is not the goal. The goal is to attain and assess recognition by leaders over you who have attained that you have attained a MasterCraftsman level of competency, with or without the Global Center for MasterCraftsman recognized certification or degree. And you know what, I'm going to just comment briefly at the end, but I really think it's what they call it in these global universities, building a trust network. So you have the university, maybe you have a corporation, maybe you have people in the field. And you recognize your credentials. I mean, it's credentialing. It's like gaming where you have badges. Some of you guys will wake up. What do you say, gaming badges? I know about that. And you get your badges when you attain some, some level of success, and then you stack your badges and you go to another level. And so you're recognized because of your skill. And a trust network means we all understand this, and regardless of certificates, whatever, or degrees, we're not looking at that. We trust each other. We're working together with one lexicon. And when Chadwick says, I'm sending two, three guys over, and they're MasterCraftsman level 3. They've done 2. I know that he has integrity to his program and to the whole training process, and I can trust that they're at that level. Imagine if you have that globally and you weren't driven by the policies and the legalisms that go with a formal degree setup. That's where we're going. Remember 2 things. I don't need to say that twice. Now, if you take the Apprenticeship Academy, for example, in that academy, we have a transcript. These are the 5 things that you need to do to get all the way through the Apprenticeship Academy. That page goes in your portfolio. So you're tracking where you're at. Or a more detailed example of that is when we get to here to shepherding. In the end of this whole thing in shepherding, tab 1 through 5, here's your personal competency portfolio. They got to go through these trainings, and they've got to do like 3 cases or whatever, but you carry that with you, and that's giving a pathway to that direction, but it's not some kind of formal program. It makes a big difference. Another illustration we have is Ebby has a program, Nehemiah Builders. It's a Craftsman of Faith pathway. Over the last 10 years in Serve India, he's developed this pathway with Build. They have 14,000 trained pastors, another 8,000 in the program, in their own partner BMIN under the center's umbrella, using the core Build resources. They have named their own pathway, and it requires those on the pathway to plant 5 house churches and train grassroots leaders, which means they have about 100,000 in the program at the second level. Now, the next one is Pathway Resources. That's the 5th one of the 6. Developed over 52 years. The first thing I did was 1972, the MAP curriculum brochure. And Jim encouraged me to go find professors when he decided to go back to Dallas and start a church and use the seminary rather than the apprenticeship, of which you can imagine 2 years into the apprenticeship program, I wasn't very happy, about that. But he said, if you're going to stick with this and you're not coming with me down there, then you better get some professors to be advisors. So for a decade, 2 trips a year, probably 20 different professors, 6 of our 8 major theological schools I visited. You saw Ted Ward yesterday. You go knock on the doors. I have a good friend. We went to high school together and ran a pretty big coffeehouse ministry, about 400 kids through high school. And actually 5 of those guys, 6 of us, 5 of them went away to seminary. None of them are in ministry today. But he made a comment one time, I'm going to Dallas, I'm paying all this stuff. I can't get that kind of time, with Elliot Johnson. You walk in, he gives you all kinds of time, and you work out with armloads of material. And that's not fair. And I think my response was something like, who's the smarter one? At any rate, so we developed the MAP curriculum. Then from 83 to 90, we worked on the Build India curriculum. Then from 1990 to 2000, Build Leadership Series 1. Then I was finally convinced that to take the Establishing Series and bring it all the way down to the First Principles, because I thought with the Leadership Series, people didn't need the First Principles. They just go ahead and teach people because they had the ideas. But it doesn't work like that for 80-90% of people, so we developed the First Principles. 95 to 2024, the Life Development Series. 2000 to 2005, Leadership Series 2, and 2015 to 2025, Mastering the Scriptures. Now, I put that illustration up there because each time we're building on it and completing it, but improving, in the process. And Ted Ward was enormously helpful here. Just like Kaiser on the encyclopedia, Ward in terms of true education, experiential learning, Socratic discussions, that kind of stuff. That's why their 2 names are on the back of the Leadership Series courses. We had lots of other professors in any given area. But, okay, so basically now, the pathway resources. There's only 3 pieces to our engine if you go beyond the, the papers that I was talking about at the beginning, the collections. One is the first principles in the story. 2 is the life development series, which now many of you have gone through the artisanship in notebook form, but it's coming into this form. This was notebook form first. This was notebook form first for years. And now shepherding counseling was notebook form, but we're moving it into a much higher level. So now we have the integrated life development pathway resources, and then mastering the scriptures. This just shows the New Testament, but we showed you the Old Testament on Sunday morning. And what's interesting also is that when you put these together now, together with how to, in other words, if you take teaching the first principles, you take teaching the story, and then you take teaching the mastering the scriptures, which includes Greek and Hebrew linguistics, then you have a very solid, sophisticated, and cutting edge, even linguistically, way to learn hermeneutics in community, in a hermeneutical community. And it's totally different than how you do it in the institution. So if you take and look at the MasterCraftsman taxonomy, generally speaking, MasterCraftsman 1, the first principles, series 1 and 2, and life development, life to the end, identifying who you're to be, and then probably parenting with a plan, because if your kids are a disaster, you won't get to MasterCraftsman 2. First principles, series 3, life development series, becoming who you're designed to be in artisanship, teaching the first principles and teaching the story. 3 is the MTS collections. There is an order to it all, but people are going to be all over the place, I know. Then the life development series, shepherding and counseling. Now that you've got 1 and 2 under your belt, teaching, mastering the scriptures, and the encyclicals. Then 4 is MTS collections, teaching, mastering the scriptures, mastering Greek linguistics and Hebrew linguistics, and then the white papers and the dialogues. And then 5 I didn't put in here, actually. What happened? Okay. The Global Assessment Recognition System is the last piece on this chart. In 1988, we developed the Build portfolio out of NACAMP. Then in 1995, it became more sophisticated with the Center for CBT. Then in 2008, we got our DAC accreditation. And now in 2024, Global Master Craftsman. And we've really perfected the whole assessment system and returned to, it was always there, but to now a far more developed portfolio and apprenticeship engine. Our system is now very robust. It is backed by the Build Cloud, so competencies for certificates and degrees can be tracked in through the Build Cloud. It also allows you to set up and track pathways. It allows you to generate certificates for all your leaders and people. It allows you to generate certificates for pathways and generate pathways themselves. And it will allow you to up-level certificates to degrees or future certifications. So the sky's the limit. Michael keeps saying we got room for hundreds of pathways, in this. Now, our degrees are now far more achievable. The degree term moved from theological degrees. Oh, yeah. We're going to keep the D-Min, but we're going to have bachelor's certificate and bachelor's degree, master's certificate and master's degree, then the D-Min, and then the executive education. But also how you can up-level executive education for certification or degrees as well. But you don't have to get into the degree or certification business at all to be able to use this. Though listed here, executive education isn't accredited. Our executive education pathways are well developed for many top leaders to gain intensive skills over a 9-month period and can be up-leveled for certificate or degree if desired. I think we got 6 executive education right now. Now, the next 30 years, oh, wait a minute. The crown jewel, I will read this, the crown jewel of our system is the MasterCraftsman 1 through 5 assessment system. This assessment is not a result of accomplishing a certain set of certificates, pathway certifications or degrees, or accredited certificates. It is the general assessment levels attained by one's own leaders. It carries core competencies that are particular to that level as generally set forth by the MasterCraftsman levels 1 through 5 and the core build resources. So you can take the core resources in each one and tell you what the competencies really are. I don't even think, Michael, from what we've been talking about, that we're ever going to even just list that you got to have these competencies to check off for the level. That's got to be a judgment when people are in the training process of the leaders. For full partners using all of the core build resources listed per level, we operate as a trust network. In other words, each network, as a full partner of GCM MAP, that's got a nice tone to it, Michael, will trust the assessment level done by each network without strict common requirements, moving us closer to Paul's traditioning process, modeled by how he assessed and commended leaders and churches to each other in his open letters for his churches. I do a fresh section in this paper, too, on how Paul built a trust network, because he talks about Romans 16, 1 Corinthians 16, does he need letters of commendation to you or from you? You actually see that he's building a trust network by the way he sends people, greets people, commends them. Phoebe, for example. It says, attaining this level of global trust will be amazing in its effect on the global spontaneous expansion of the church. Okay, so we finish, and this is my last slide, with next 30 theological education, major developments needed over the next 30 years. And I'm going to do another one for the second paradigm paper for missions. And we've got things that we need to develop, but some things that now have come together in a similar way, which is a global network of apostolic teams, and the nice little chart that we got from somewhere. So the 5 things are libraries and publishing. That really has to be done. Steve did I structured my library around that theological encyclopedia, not around the Dewey Decimal System. Dewey Decimal System is the epitome of all fragmentation, infinite fragmentation. But we can organize our library, so the last whole section is theology and culture. Steve did a write-up, and we got to have a new system that we all recognize. And publishing. You've got all in your networks, or civilization-wide or citywide, we need a publishing industry within each one of your networks. People say, well, how are we ever going to write? Jeff's written it all. No. I've got the framework is all, not even the detailed work, for example, in 1 Corinthians. There's an infinite amount of papers and issues, biblical theology-wise, work in culture, to deal with. But you got to have a publishing house or a publishing engine that is not market-driven the way it is in the U.S. by people who sit in a cubicle and write Sunday school material who don't have a clue what they're writing about when it comes right down to it. An average, I think it was 130 million a year on Sunday school material from our 4 top, like David C. Cook Publishing, of Sunday school material. And here, we'll give this to you, and that way you can fragment your kids' thinking over a 12-year period by using our Sunday school material. Resident theologians, we got to deal with that one. We kind of have the parts of that in place. A global apprenticeship system. This is I've got a study done by McKinsey that studied 70 countries, but focused on 9 of them, showing that our secondary education, when you graduate from secondary education everywhere in the world, our students are not prepared to go into the traditional university system. Somewhere between 13 and 15% on the average are ready to do that. So it actually becomes a detrimental system. So we need a global apprenticeship system that we recognize. For example, when Modi took over in India, there's 20 million of the rich, there's 200 million of the middle class, but there's 800 million of what he called the aspiring class. And these, for example, in Mumbai, there's 20,000 mini factories. A mini factory is a one-stall garage here. And so you bring them in, and we got house churches spreading through Mumbai, for example. I've had 8,000. If there's an apprenticeship where they can get into this and learn how to raise that to the next level and get some recognition for it in the process, and then impact the culture when the churches are competent in this, it's unlimited. But we got to have a global way to do that. And it's there. The systems are there in these global universities. A global shepherding counseling network. In other words, we'll train you and we'll have a network so we don't have to go to the psychological care world. We can support each other, networks around the world, and medical professionals can associate with it. And this one, Global Church Network System, I'm calling it, from Bible translation to oral learners to our core resources. Because Bible translation translates material, Bibles, and most of them sit on the shelves because they're not connected to networks. And I believe, just like the seminaries do classical studying of Greek, and they really can't think in an integrated way, I think even the whole Bible translation world, with its linguistic approach, is a fragmented academic linguistic. We had stuff translated for China, and now in the third generation, those guys said, we can't use it. And it was translated paid for professional Wycliffe translators. Because again, there's a fragmentation. I see a completely inverted system. And I've seen this happen now I mentioned it again, where you take leaders that really understand the issues, and you got the canonical intertextuality linguistics, and then you know how to be able to do the theological chunking, and then they know how to translate because they just begin the translation process. They don't go through this whole sophisticated system that winds up actually producing a relatively fragmented translation. And we got partnerships for good reasons with a number of these, but we'll either drag them this direction, or we'll then be smart enough to completely do it ourselves. I got the whole thing mapped out. So those are some of the big things for the next 30. I took too long, Michael, so. So we're supposed to talk about it a little bit, but since you framed it, I don't know if we... What stands out to you? When you kind of see it pared it back in this kind of situation,
Yeah.
What stands out to you other than,
Well,
that's going to work?
it's going to work. It's tied back to our roots. It's an integration of, I hope part of what you've all seen is an integration back to everything that's been going on for the 50 years. How many slides did you have a date on them back to 1970-something, 1980-something, and showed the one conversation that's been had since that point? I mean, I hope that's part of what you see. All the component pieces, I understand it's going to take a while to get how this really impacts you individually, how this impacts your situation, but right now you just need to know that this general framework. After the break, I'll show a single chart that has all 5 of these up on it and try to start showing you some of the implementation of this and how you're going to begin to experience some of this and see this worked out. But I think that's the first thing that impacts me is Randall Collins in his book said, The Sociology of Philosophy, said it's really rare for a single conversation like this to happen in amongst a group of people over a period of decades. It rarely happens. Rarely happens. But if it does, that's the birth. That can be, not always, but it can be the birth of when a paradigm actually changes that in that first generation that could last for multiple generations, which ultimately gets you to a critical mass, and then you actually have actual paradigm change, or what we're calling a shape of a new paradigm for Christianity, shaping the next Christendom.
And part of the reason I went back, it was fun going back and reading them. I haven't gone back to the paradigm papers for a while, and people go quickly into the encyclicals and hope that nobody brings up the fact that they need to read the paradigm papers. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I went back to them is that I did a consistent job, like I showed you on this one, of summarizing the bullet points so you can see the whole perspective. And that's really why at the beginning of the paper that I lined up your global dialogues and my white papers, is because we're rooting them back into those 2 conversations, the paradigm papers conversation and the encyclical conversation in a way that you can see where we're going just by the nature of, how they're laid out.
Yeah.
And keep that conversation going at a
That's
very
right.
high level.
Because sometimes I think in terms of pictures in my mind. We'll say this and then we'll take a break. But one thing you have to tie yourself to Scripture. Have I said that yet? And so you're dialoguing around these things, the clarity of these, of getting back to the author's intent. And then over here, the picture I have in my mind is what you've just shown us is a tree. And the roots are what God was doing in the 1970s, 1980s. And as it grows up, then, yeah, there's little knots and there's extra branches that need to be lopped off every now and again. But as that grows, it's all an integrated single system. And so sometimes we're talking about a particular branch with particular leaves on it, but I don't know if you can see the picture, but this, so if you sometimes people will say, well, Jeff, I think, I've reviewed your whole system, and I think we need a course on Bible history.
On what?
Bible history, or church history, or we need a course on and that's because you're I don't know if that's the right way to go, because that'll take too long to explain what I mean. But the point is it's a whole integrated tree that's tied together. So I think some people just think, oh man, this is just a wild idea from wild people. Like yesterday with the gathering. This is just a wild idea from wild people. But it's integrated into a whole one conversation that's been being had. Okay, let's take a break. Take a break, come back, 15 minutes. We'll finish up.
Mike, I need a thing again, my batteries.